AI policy. Why did the two countries care so much about the generative AI wave?
Well, I think it's important, the architecture that Professor Chen just described. If you think about that, it can be useful in any application. We're already seeing it in healthcare, education, finance, transportation. This is an incredibly powerful underlying technology, but it's also dual use. So all those good applications we're talking about. The flip side of that is can be used as a weapon of war, to support weapons of war, can be used for surveillance, intelligence collection. And in this era of geopolitical competition, geostrategic competition rather, where the US and China view each other as peer competitors, there is a zero-sum nature to this competition, where if the other country is further along in that technology, not only do they have a military advantage to potentially change the balance of power in the world in a way that suits them, but they also have an underlying economic advantage, an underlying scientific and technological advantage that can ultimately make that competition in some ways irrelevant if you establish a big enough lead in one of those domains. So you can imagine this is the critical fight of the 21st century, this competition. I think the question we're going to get into in this forum too is that the right view? Is this really zero-sum? Are there aspects of this competition that might be zero-sum, but others that we can seek to isolate? And there are no easy answers to this, but I guess we'll try to get into it over the next hour.
Yeah, I think this is right up your alley, Thomas. How companies and governments work together. You recently found a policy nexus to get policymakers and also enterprises, individuals involved in working together. I'm really curious to learn more about your work and also get your perspective on how these different groups should work together in building better AI.
Thank you. First of all, very glad to be here. And I just want to mention at the beginning that I'm not an AI expert, although I'm the stakeholder for AMD and NVIDIA. But I recently found my consultancy in the US, in Canada, and also in Hong Kong, China. I think the first point that I disagree with Michael is I don't think this is a zero-sum game. I think there are rooms for collaboration. What we do is trying to find that room to collaborate. I think number one, what we do is we try to let each side to know the rules of the game. Number two is we try to find communication channels. And number three is we explore the room or the potential solutions for that. We need a world that is not decoupled. And just imagine for the first and second industrial revolution, if you are not the UK, or if you are not the US, of course you are not in the first tier, top tier of the nation's competition, but it's not the end of the story, it's not the end of the history. You're gonna be fine. So that's some thoughts I want to share.
Gotcha. Yeah, we're going to come back to the question of cooperation and competition a little bit later, because this is obviously so big of a topic. But before that, I really want to double click on how AI is disrupting industries and how this is why do governments care about it? I want to talk to you a little bit more, Professor Chen, about this disruptive potential and economic potential of AI. If you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yes, I pretty much view AI as, one of the biggest innovation, perhaps until the 21st century until now. A little bit of my background. So actually, I came to the United States in 2007. I came to join the Carnegie Mellon as a PhD student in the newly founded department at that time, which is called the Machine Learning Department. That was founded almost 2007, I was almost the first batch of PhD students there. And at that time, everyone is so uncertain about this, department. like we just make a joke, we enter there saying that we hope this department will exist, for the next 10 years, so we won't face the embarrassing situation when I get graduated and I don't find my department anymore. So that's just but it's surprisingly because of basically the GPU advancement. You see how NVIDIA stock just rises in the past year and many other scientific kind of advancement. The AI really onto a tipping point that really makes an impact to everyone. So it's pretty much like the people invention of the wheels for transportation, the internet for information communication, or say the printing for disseminate the information. So AI is really a very powerful tool. You can see nowadays will become a multiplier of human efforts. It's can easily provide you very accurately summarized information, can bring and can also help you make very complicated decisions. So it can really be your assistant or even your partner. So nowadays probably your assistant, but I'm very confident in the next 2 or 3 years, you will find this will become your partner to really help you navigate over all the complex decisions. So as we know, the decision is the most critical part for nowadays human beings, and we are facing all kinds of decisions every day. And AI would just give unparalleled kind of ability to collect the information, organize the information, and help you make the scenario or case studies for all different kinds of scenarios and help you navigate through these complex decisions. So it's really, kind of a new form of improving the efficiency of information collection, information organization, and complex decision making. So I think this is a very, very amazing thing that you will see in the next few years. And also it's more empowering. Before the AI, we talk about, let's say, automated driving. It's only about kind of an experiment. But now with AI, I think this will come true in the very relatively short amount of time. So it's also facilitated, many kind of new technology advancement. So probably with AI, you can achieve, quantum computation. Because with AI, you can have discover many new medications or vaccine. So AI is just kind of an unparalleled tool that can help human with all kinds of very complex decisions. So that's, I think, is the way it's kind of disruptive in everybody's life.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that. I remember when I was in college, I was working for this very unknown AI startup called OpenAI, and it was a nonprofit at the time, and most of my friends were doing internships at Goldman, at McKinsey, famous consulting companies and banks, and they were asking me, why are you working on this AI thing, right? Why are you so obsessed with the idea of AGI? And I'm like, well, what I'm doing is going to disrupt what you're doing in the next 10 years. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, and my fundamental belief that AI will be the next industrial revolution, and that this is going to be the single most important technology in the 21st century. And just speaking of AI, another really big trend in the 21st century is the competition and collaboration between the US and China. And on that point, I really wanted to ask you, Thomas, about your insights on what's happening in the AI landscape in both the US and China. How do you think geopolitics and AI are playing out in both of these countries?
Thanks. I think for number one is AI is, in terms of many analysts' point of view, or even myself, is really leading the third or the fourth industrial revolution. And in terms of the scenarios for application, it's really is going to be anywhere, empowering your business in terms of defense, finance, anything you can think of. So I think really to being in a leading role for that is really something both US and China trying to achieve. But I think in terms of collaboration, why I'm saying that is, I think it shouldn't be a zero-sum game for some reason. I think for number one, we can see that each side of the Pacific is making its own AI model. And for that, you have a different set of database for national security issues or whatever reason. But the thing that I worry the most is if we have two circles or rounds of different data trained by trained for different AI models. If we're asking one simple question to different AIs, what if they give us very different or even self-contradicting answers? I think that's a nightmare for human. I think it shouldn't be like that. And I think for number two, there's a lack of trust in terms of collaboration right now, not only for AI, but for many industries. But I think for AI, for example, or for other industry, we need to find a way based on zero trust. Let me give you one example. Let's say, I think both the Americans or Chinese, they all agree that 1 + 1 = 2. That's basic maths or physics. The sun rises from the east and the sun sets from the west. Like, I think this is something you don't need to trust me, who I am, but you know that this is something we both agree on. I think in terms of AI, or in terms of any other cutting-edge tech, I think the world needs a universal standard with zero trust. And there needs to be a way for coexistence. I think we cannot split the rules, the standards. Otherwise, you will really see a decoupled world. And that's what we are trying to do is, we want to at least explore the potential for collaboration. And in terms of AI, there needs to be at least some common ground for that.
Yeah, on that point, I think what's really interesting is the idea of like there being two very different systems of AI. So you have like the Chinese AI and the American AI, and that definitely is something that I'm seeing in the investing and like startup landscape. I made a trip back to China about 2 months ago, and I talked to a bunch of different Chinese startups. And one of the startups that I chatted with told me that the biggest competitive advantage of their model is that they can generate quote unquote politically correct text. And just one very concrete example, if you ask other Chinese large language models to generate an image of a national flag, it will give you the US flag because the fundamental model is an American model, data is from the US, but because they filtered their data, they're using purely Chinese data, they're the only model that can generate a Chinese flag for you. And I'm like, that's a very interesting, competitive competitive advantage, and also offers you a lot of insight into what's going on in China's AI governance. But of course, I know like Michael, you've done a lot of work on how China's governing AI and new institutions being set up in China. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, I think at a broad level, the approach in China and the US looks similar, what the federal national governments are doing. And that is pushing everything through the prism of great power competition. But once you go beyond that level, it starts to look very, very different. So I think, I'm losing all my stuff here. I think one big difference is the Chinese government is much more involved with companies in the development of AI. And you see this through regulations like the algorithm registry. You see Chinese policymaking on AI being much more active in terms of regulating the guardrails for what companies should or should not be able to do. And to be honest, I don't really take a normative judgment on that at this stage, like whether that's the right approach or not. I think in some ways it makes sense, in others it's probably overbearing and will hurt innovation. But we won't know that for a while. By contrast, the US national government has basically decided there will be no AI-specific regulations that cut across all industries. They're leaving it entirely to sector-specific regulators. So that's a very, very different regulatory environment. But then to bring this back again in similarities, keep in mind, this current iteration of AI that Professor Chen was describing, this paradigm of generative AI, this is a relatively new phenomenon, that this is at the forefront of what AI is. Until about 10 years ago, this was considered kind of a fringe part of the AI community, and all of those kooks doing neural networks, they'll never be able to reproduce the human brain in artificial form, and why would you even want to do that? So obviously those people were wrong. But what that means is there's really not a lot of global talent out there that has worked on these issues. 3 computer scientists received the Turing Prize, which is like the Nobel Prize for Computer Science, in 2018. Jan LeCun, Joshua Bengio, and I'm blanking, and Jeffrey Hinton. Yes, of course. Think about just these 3 professors, the graduate students that have come through their programs. There are a lot of people in China. There are a lot of people in the U.S., UK, Canada. They all talk with each other. They're classmates. They have this network, and I think this community is much more of a monolith in the sense of all these people are speaking with each other. They are in constant communication. They don't buy the paradigm that their governments have set up of competition. And so when you look at to get back to your question, the practical implications of this, what companies are building, what they're worried about, it looks to me very, very similar in both countries right now.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that, as you mentioned, the Chinese government is taking a much more heavy-handed approach to governing AI, whereas the U.S. is much more liberal in terms of AI governance compared with both China and also the European Union. And what's interesting is that this actually reminds me of another technology, which is Web3 and cryptography, because China has banned Web3 and crypto domestically. And I know that Professor Chen does a lot of research around AI and Web3. I'm really curious to see how that's playing out in the U.S. since it's already banned in China. What's happening in the U.S. now?
Yeah, it's a good question. So actually, Thomas just talk about what we call kind of zero trust, which means that you do not trust your AI system to make responsible decisions. And how do we make it trustable? It's trustworthy. And I think eventually blockchain or this kind of new technology will also play an important role. So in my potential view, in the future, you probably will have some very US-centric huge AI system. You probably have a very China-based AI system with all trained by Chinese corpus, Chinese data. But you probably have another one, which is kind of a decentralized AI system, where we all contribute, the scholars all contribute, the code, the free data, and to this kind of a very decentralized AI system that should be trustable and it can be used by everyone. So it's pretty much if you think about this, you have this banking system for China, banking system for US. They are pretty much separated, although they talk to each other. You can trade between the bank from China and the US. They have maybe bonds. They have fixed income. That's different financial investment. But still they're different. One in China, one in the US. But now the people think that no, I want something. It's more belongs to the whole world, which is Bitcoin. The concept of Bitcoin was proposed. And this was proposed about 10 years ago, and gradually it's kind of a distributed ledger. And gradually was adopted by the Main Street, Wall Street. For example, the Bitcoin ETF was proposed, was approved by the states. So it's also, in my view, it's probably one day you have very powerful, AI system with a huge amount of computational power in China, in US. They do not really talk to each other very often, but we also have a large decentralized AI system, which was pretty much improved by everyone, maybe sitting here, we contribute to the data, we contribute to our usage, we contribute to the new technology. For example, the decentralized or kind of blockchain can indeed solve quite a few critical problems in AI. The first one, I think, is pretty much the computational power dominance. So for example, OpenAI has a huge computational power, so that you can now really compete with it. But with decentralization, you probably can leverage all the free resources in the parts of the world to build another kind of AI, decentralized AI system. And secondly, now you have a centralized AI, you have to trust everything this AI said. I just give an example. For example, you ask GPT to give you an answer for some question, and they charge you $20 per month, and they say, okay, I'm using GPT-4. But how do you tell they're not using GPT 3.5 or some other kind of question answering platform? Or sometimes you say, I want 65 billion parameters AI model to generate me an image. But how do you know it's not using a 7 billion much smaller model, or just grab some images on the internet to feed back to you? and to to maximize its revenue. So for that trustworthy AI, we definitely need something called verifiable. We need to verify the correctness and the trustworthy of the AI. And also we need to judge its moral standard, which we call it alignment. Whether the answer is aligned with human interest and human value. This also leads to a very big topic of safety AI. And pretty much safety AI, I think, can only be achievable, by a certain level of decentralization. And finally, if you want a certain kind of decentralization, you need the right incentive. You need to give all the parties in this system certain kind of reward. And clearly, the Web3, which is governed by tokens, can provide a way to correctly or in a good way of incentivize the people to kind of improving the AI system, trying to make it be better aligned with human interests and human values. So I think these are the ways I see how the kind of decentralization, not only the blockchain is one approach of achieving the decentralization, but there are many other approaches by blockchain, by cryptography, by ZK knowledge proof, all these kind of technologies to achieve decentralization of AI. And I definitely believe in the future there will be a room for decentralization of AI for the people all around the world to contribute and to collaborate. Yeah, this is my point.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I remember, Thomas, before the panel, we were chatting about your work around data security and your views about how data security could be, a challenge in U.S. and China cooperation. And this kind of is related to the idea of blockchains and putting data on blockchain. I'm really curious, what other challenges beyond data security? What are some other challenges you see in U.S. and China cooperation?
Thanks. Beyond that, I think, definitely, I think number one is, is of the perception, not only from the US, but also from China. I think all of us, we foresee a more chaotic world, no matter in Middle East, Europe, or elsewhere. I think Americans and Chinese see our future not that blessed. I think this is not only for these two countries, but for this century or for this 1 or 2 decades. We don't see we are going into something great, and I think that's wrong. I think we should see in a more positive way from the investors, from the government, from the innovators, from the business people. If we even don't, the confidence is everything. If we don't believe that the US and China will get along, if you don't believe that something can be worked out in between US and China, if you don't believe the next century or the next generation, few decades, if you feel that something is going to be shitty, then how can you work on something better than this? So I think it's for the perception or the confidence is at a lower point compared with what we have fast-growing few decades in the past. That's a big challenge. That's a big challenge from our hearts, from our brain, from it's a perception thing. I think number two, again, I really like the comment from Professor Chen. I keep saying zero trust. A lack of trust is the biggest issue. I think other things can be technical or mechanical, but if you don't have such trust, you first of all, you think it's going to be a shitty world. Secondly, you don't believe anyone, but that's okay. Even you have zero trust, I think maybe we should find out a coexisting formula or way to work together without trust. I have a crazy idea. What if we use physics to rule the world? Maybe people from the physics department say physics is ruling the world now, but my idea is if we keep putting material together from the Chinese side or from the American side, okay, we both agree on 1 + 1 = 2. That's something we put in the middle. We all believe that's true. We keep adding things, keep adding materials to the same pool, and we leave something we disagree on the side. Then the pool will be bigger and bigger and bigger, and that is universal. I think at least this is something we can try. But to answer your question again, shortly, is lack of confidence for the future from both sides and lack of trust for each other. But I think this is where we can put limits, and humans should be confident that we can fix all of this, even when we disagree with each other.
Yeah, I think those are like wonderful points. I just wanted to chime in and talk about like how difficult it is to do business in the US and China from the perspective of an investor. It is now super hard to raise capital in the US and invest in China. It's also really hard for Chinese investors to invest in the US because of geopolitics. I don't know how many of you guys know, but a lot of the big VC funds, a lot of the investors in China actually raise their capital from US university endowments, like including Columbia endowment. You'd be surprised how much of the money going to Chinese tech companies actually come from US pension funds and universities. Now that capital is almost largely cut from the Chinese market because these US institutions are very worried about risk. And that's a very concrete example of how hard it is to do business. I know a lot of Chinese startup founders who, because the economy in China isn't doing very well, they want to come to the US to start a company. And then the issue there is, we have a Chinese team, the headquarters might be in China, or maybe it's a US entity, but we have some engineers in China. But it's so hard for them to raise capital in the US because all the investors in the US are like, hey, you are a Chinese company, you're controlled by Beijing, how can you do business here? So I totally agree with you, Thomas, that the environment has never been worse for US and China, largely because of competition, largely because of geopolitics. I am curious though, because the situation is so bad for both the US and China. What are the goals that the governments want? What would the US government and the Chinese government want out of this competition?
First, can I just I want to co-sign your point that you just made about financial constraints. I think that is spot on. And it's interesting, in Washington, we're fixating on AI hardware right now. Semiconductor export controls, trying to block China's access to advanced chips with mixed results. And it's interesting, I was last I was in Hong Kong in December and talking with people there about the impact of those restrictions. And certainly China does not like those restrictions and wishes they were gone. But when I speak with computer scientists and engineers and researchers, the problem they describe is more of a nuisance than, oh my gosh, we can't do any research anymore. Hearing anecdotes where they say, okay, well, we had to front load NVIDIA chips before the export controls went in place, but we did that. And maybe we have 80% of the raw compute power compared to the current state of the art, but we think we can, we can maybe innovate on the software side to make our hardware more efficient to get maybe to 90%, we can live with that, right? Now that gap may grow over time, but that's the paradigm now. Conversely, there's just not enough money. And this is a new experience, to Jenny's point. I mean, the heyday of China having essentially infinite access to capital is over. And that is largely a consequence of the Chinese national government's own policies and the underlying economic changes that they didn't respond to in time. But I think that's something that U.S. policymakers should be more aware of. Is it's easy to draw a line directly from AI hardware to AI capabilities, but even though it's a more indirect route, this financial capital argument, I think, is a really, really important part of this piece in the current situation. I haven't answered your question at all, so I'm going to come back to, what do these governments want? I think in the Chinese government's case, it's, we feel fairly confident we understand what they want. And it stems from Xi Jinping's vision that China should be the preeminent power in the world. US-led hegemony is a system that no longer is suitable for China, and to the extent AI ambitions connect to that agenda, they should support that agenda. there are views in the U.S. government that I think are the mirror of that. That we are currently the preeminent power in the world. We would like to retain that position, and therefore, what should we do given the U.S. does have AI leadership to make sure that AI is working in support of that goal? But there's a lot of diversity of opinion in Washington. There are people who are involved in this policymaking that don't even buy the concept of strategic competition. I mean, they think that this is just another phase of the economic relationship that has predominated, economic and strategic relationship that's predominated since 1978. And for those people, you break them down even to more subsets. It could be people that want us to be closer with our allies. It could be people that want us to be more sensitive to American labor, right? There's a very broad diversity of views, and where I think this ends up is the U.S. position is actually quite confusing. And I hear this from my counterparts in China all the time. They either say, well, it's clear that the U.S. is just trying to keep China down, or they say, we don't know what we could do to change the U.S.'s actions. We don't know what the U.S. actually wants out of this. And I think the U.S. policymakers need to have that discussion. And look, we have a noisy system. We're never going to reach consensus in the way that the Chinese system has reached consensus. But we got to be a little bit more coherent here. And one thing I will say is, even among the most hawkish voices in Washington, I do not hear people say the U.S. has a goal of just keeping China down for the sake of keeping China down. Economic degradation is not a goal that the U.S. believes it is pursuing. And I hear this from people who say, actually, a small subset would like that to be the goal. And they even argue, no, but that is not what our policy is. So I think that's important to inject some clarity in this discussion. But that is on the U.S. to explain its position better, and I think we achieve this through dialogue and diplomacy, and even if nothing comes of that substantively for a few years because we just don't have an alignment in strategic interests, I have found when I have those conversations with my counterparts in China, when you put that on the table, the response is, I don't like that, but I understand that, and at least I respect that you're being honest with me. Right? At least we can have a more constructive conversation if I see that that's where you're coming from.
Yeah, no, obviously, really great points. I really like the point about the U.S. being confused about its own policies and confusing signals. And obviously, we all heard about what's happening to TikTok and a lot of Chinese enterprises operating in the U.S. The U.S. wants to ban TikTok, it wants to divest it. A lot of changing policies all the time, and I just wanted to ask Thomas what he thinks the biggest challenges are for Chinese enterprises operating in the U.S. Obviously, TikTok's facing a lot of pressure. You previously worked for Huawei on their policy team. I'm sure you guys had a lot of pressure as well. Would love to hear your experiences about that.
Thank you. Yeah, I certainly have a lot of things to say on the record, but maybe more off the record. But for me, I think there are a lot of challenges. I think I actually recently commented a lot on the TikTok issue. Actually, I was when the TikTok bill passed the House recently. I was on the House of Representatives from the Capitol Hill. I think the challenges for me or for foreign companies in the U.S. is the U.S. keeps saying that, okay, we don't want to decouple, we want to de-risk. And it's not that, keep doing your thing, but we're going to just have more scrutiny, that's okay. But for me, I think TikTok as a global company with its Chinese origin, or how you call it, I think among the most of other players in terms of facing the same geopolitical or domestic political issues, I think TikTok really showed the most of willingness to collaborate with the U.S. government, with the Congress. The CEO went there a couple of times to give the testimony, and they try to hire the best lobbyists, lawyers to fight. And they had a really good collaboration with Oracle. I think they tried every means, by all means, they try to save their assets here in the US. They want to keep their platform. They want to be still in the US market. But I think the biggest concern or the puzzle is for a company, for a foreign background company, already tried everything they can. Let's say, for instance, for Project Texas, they have. For the American data has to be stored on the American soil, protected by American citizens. I think, and they're willing to talk to anyone who wants to talk to them. I think they tried everything they can, full willingness to collaborate. And if this cannot give them a green light or a pass, in what way can a foreign company get a way out? What is the end solution? Let's say if you try everything you can, and they still let's say, okay, go away. We just don't want you. We don't want to see it. I think that's a lie. We want to be clear that if you don't want anything like that in the US, just let them go first. Don't waste your time. Just go. But even you try that hard, you can't get it, or you can't get something. I think that's not in the interest for the US. I think if TikTok lost their game by the end, many other foreign companies will say, okay, they fight like that and they can't win. Maybe we just leave. And we don't have the resource, we don't have a team like them. Someday this will happen to us, we will leave. Maybe not just for Chinese companies, maybe from Middle East, maybe from elsewhere, but that's really not in the interest for the US market. And I think that's bad for American people and that's bad for the American business. That's my concern.
Can I jump in on this?
Sure.
I think that, Thomas, I hear your perspective. I think we should be careful of extrapolating this to something that applies to all foreign businesses. I think this is a very unique case. The reality is US social media companies cannot operate in China. So on the principle of reciprocity, TikTok arguably should have never been allowed into the US market, but they were ordered to divest in 2020, and for reasons I still can't understand, the Trump administration just forgot or they just stopped following through on that order. But this executive order from 2020 is still on the books. That is still the law. The reason for this congressional action is because that law has not been effective in actually achieving a divestment. And so this is an attempt to strengthen the legal case. But this is all rule of law activity that's going on. And frankly, the other the foreign companies that I speak with, they don't see parallels. This is something that could possibly affect them. It's a very unique case where we have a large, high-profile company that in a highly concentrated industry where our players have never been allowed into the Chinese market, and this is essentially strengthening the legal framework to reach an outcome that should have been resolved 4 years ago.
And I know
Sorry, if I may add on quickly one point to that is, I think we should focus on AI for sure, but for that, I'm not defending anything for anyone, but I'm just sharing some facts. I think, let's say for Google, I think Google used to operate in China. I think they are facing a similar issue that they have been told that they have to put their database in China for the Chinese market, and they don't want to do it, and they quit the market by choice. I think that's one case, one fact I want to share. Number two fact is, let's say for Apple, I think Apple China and Apple Global is different. So for Apple phone users in China, the information, the data, the cloud is in China, supervised by the Chinese side, so it's in China. But elsewhere is in the US or Singapore, I don't know, but in China, the Apple's data is stored in Chinese soil, and Apple still operates in China, and they just recently opened their flagship store in Shanghai. So that's the fact. I'm not trying to convince anything, but that's the fact. But I think the ramification for TikTok, I think, still based on my opinion, I think that may goes beyond the Chinese company, because there are examples that, let's say Japanese companies, or I've given another example of French company Alstom. They were facing some big challenges, but without the resource, not having the same kind of resources like TikTok. So, but anyway, I think we can have more conversation on that after the stage.
Yeah, for the sake of time, we are running low on time, and I do want to end on a more positive note on the question of cooperation. And then, like, after the final question, I'll open up the floor to questions. Yes, on cooperation, we'd love to get Professor Chen's perspective on how you think the U.S. and China can work together on AI.
Well, yeah, just putting the geopolitical kind of issues aside, I think there are definitely many ways, like Chinese and U.S. government can collaborate in terms of this AI booming. Clearly, as you can see now, the U.S. company is much stronger in terms of like architecture. For example, we have this OpenAI, we have Google, have this kind of NVIDIA. The U.S. It seems this big enterprise of the U.S. has leveraged the knowledge how to train a training level kind of parameter AI models on like tens of thousands of cars altogether. It's definitely the infrastructure side. I would say U.S. is much stronger. But on the other side, usually it's pretty much like in the web, in the internet age. Later on, you will see like Chinese companies have many new innovations, like in terms of business models. For example, Meituan or Alibaba have this largest e-commerce. So the Chinese company definitely have a huge market, so that they collect very valuable data sets, which U.S. company not easy to get access. They might have some new business models because they are like the customer size is so large. So I can envision many different kinds of kind of collaborations. For example, in the medical domain, maybe the Chinese company can Huadaijin or some other company can provide more like DNA data, and with the computational power or resources from the US, we can definitely collaborate to achieve like new medications or new vaccines to help people all over the world. And we can have like many more patients data from China. And in the US, you definitely know how difficult it is to get some patient data from like a hospital. In China, we also, although we have this kind of laws or regulations on patient privacy, but definitely it's easier to get anonymized data, like in China. So it's similar to the internet age. You definitely have like US has better infrastructure, better computational power. Chinese have better larger markets and somewhat easier access to the data. So ideally, putting the kind of political issue aside, I think there's many rooms for the collaboration. For example, on the ESG, I believe there will definitely be the room, for the AI to better access, better, optimize a company's ESG index, how make it more green. Definitely this is the space where, China and the US can have a lot of collaboration. Yeah, this is my view.
Yeah, my last question goes to Michael on AI safety and governance. I know this is like its own topic. It's a very broad topic. I know you've written about the UK AI Summit and how UK is trying to position itself in bringing both the US and China to the table to talk about AI safety. I am curious to hear your thoughts about how the US and China can work together on AI safety and global governance.
I think it's really important that we have the research community of both these countries talking to each other on AI safety. I'll start with the bad news, which is why this is difficult, which is so far it's been really challenging to unpack the safety issues that also confer competitive advantage, right? So if you think about an alignment problem, do you remember, I think it was Sydney was the chatbot from Microsoft that just went off the rails a few years ago. This is probably 5 years ago at this point. Racist, misogynist nonsense. They had to shut that chatbot down. Now, obviously, we have evolved. But the point there is actually it's the same technical problem, which is, if you think about it, OpenAI resolved that safety issue. Now that's more of a proximate near-term safety issue than existential risk. But the point is, if you can get the chatbot aligned on that definition of safety, you have a competitive advantage, right? People want to engage with safe products. Regulators only want to approve or permit safe AI. So there's a huge amount of competitive advantage that's wrapped up in these conversations that to some extent limits how far we can go in terms of our cooperation. Now, the good news. What I think the UK AI Safety Summit showed was that in government and in the research and business communities, China and the US talk about safety in the same way. In some ways, China and the US are more aligned than the US and the European Union. China and the US are more likely to, researchers, policymakers, people in those countries are more likely to see existential risk as a serious threat that we need to start planning for now. The European Union, often I hear from my counterparts there, think that that is a regulatory capture strategy, that it's essentially AI labs that are trying to hype up this long-term risk because they don't want to be held to account for things like bias and discrimination that is affecting people today. I don't agree with that view. I think it's genuine when you hear from the research community, again, in both China and the US. These are real risks, and we need to, as the technology moves, our understanding of the risks will also evolve. So for example, the Biden administration passes executive order in the fall that set a computational threshold on models above which you would need to engage in some reporting around risk. Now, even just in the last few months, it seems like maybe that threshold might be too low in the sense that our understanding of alignment with AI systems that might be smarter than us has evolved in the last few months. It's moving very, very quickly. But I'll close by saying, what gives me a lot of encouragement is when you hear these countries using the same language on key issues that affect all of us. And if we can keep that conversation going, there may be small wins or agreements on the margin, and the relationship is still going to be fraught. I am not optimistic about the next 5 years of this relationship on a lot of other issues. But that makes it all the more important that on this issue where our interests are aligned, we use the same language, we have a research and business community that's very connected, we should continue talking for the sake of talking. And who knows, that may lead to breakthroughs in other aspects of the relationship.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful note to end on, and I would love to thank my panelists, but also open up the floor to questions. If you guys have a question, feel free to walk up here. There's a microphone, and then we're happy to take them.